Chapter 5 of Tractate Nedarim continues discussing the laws of vows. If two partners who share ownership of a courtyard both took vows against benefiting from each other, both of them are not allowed to enter the courtyard. Others say they can both enter into their own portion of the courtyard. Both of the partners are forbidden to install a mill or oven or to raise chickens in the courtyard. If only one of the partners vowed against benefiting from the other, he can't enter the courtyard. Others say he can enter only in his portion, and we compel the man who took this vow to sell his courtyard share. If some other third guy took a vow against benefiting from one of the courtyard owners, he's not allowed to enter the courtyard. Others say he's allowed to only enter the other's courtyard portion. If somebody took a vow against benefiting from somebody, and that man has a bathhouse or olive press in the city that's leased to others, if he still has a holding on the bathhouse or olive press, the vower can't use it. If he doesn't have a holding on it, the vower can use it. If a man vowed against entering a man's house or purchasing a man's field, and the owner dies or sells it to another, the vower can now enter the house or purchase the field. If he vowed against entering this house or buying this field, even if the owner dies or sells it, he can't enter or purchase them. The Gemara says the Mishnah first case of the dual vows on the shared courtyard, the cases where the partners vowed against themselves using the other's portion. But what if they vowed against the other partner using their portion? Would that create variance in the opinions? It's debated and it's unresolved. Further, some argue that the disputed case as to whether or not they are banned from using the courtyard or they can just use their portions is if the courtyard is large enough to be divided. If it's too small for that, both would permit using it. This is disputed, as we see from a related case by a synagogue, which is jointly owned by a town. It cannot be entered due to a vow from benefit, even though it's not divisible. So rather, it's said the argument between the opinions is where the courtyard is too small to be divided. Both would agree it's forbidden to enter if it's large enough to be split. It says we follow the opinion that allows each to enter their courtyard portion. In regards to the case of a vow against benefiting from someone who owns a bathhouse where he can't use it if the owner still has a holding over it, a holding, according to some, is the owner still retaining the right to at least a quarter of the income. Others define it as the owner having a fixed annual rental fee. A related case, if somebody vows against somebody else entering his house and he then dies or sells the house, it's learned from a different case that someone is allowed to prohibit something of his to somebody and have that continue to apply even after it leaves his possession. There are similar cases discussed, and they're qualified further. New Mishnah. If somebody said, I am chayrim to you, chayrim being property vowed to the temple treasury, he's essentially vowing that the other guy can't benefit from him. If somebody vowed, you are chayrim to me, the vower can no longer benefit from that man. If somebody said, I am chayrim to you, and you are chayrim to me, they cannot benefit from each other. Both of such people can benefit from a public use faculty in Israel for those who came from Babylon, places such as the Temple Mount, the courtyards, and the pilgrimage festival path water cisterns. They can't benefit from a faculty in the town they live in, like the town square, the bathhouse, the town synagogue, and its ark and books. If they want to allow the other to use these faculties, they can give up their share of the faculty by writing it over to the Nasi, the leader of the Jewish people of that time. Some say you can write it to the Nasi or to anyone else, but if you write it to the Nasi, nobody needs to acquire it on your behalf. Well, this would be necessary if it was written to anybody else. Others say even the Nasi needs to have some acquire it on his behalf, and it just mentioned the Nasi here as that's what was typically done. Some rule that the people of Galilee don't need to write over the shares of communal faculties to the Nasi, as this was already done by the earlier generations. The Gemara further describes the process in regards to the people of Galilee. It said that they kept on making vows against benefiting from each other, so they had their shares of the communal properties written over to the Nasi. New Mishnah. If somebody vowed against benefiting from somebody and he has no food, the other man can give his food to somebody else as a gift and have that man give it to the vower. It says an incident of this where a father vowed against benefiting his son, so the son wanted his father to attend his child's wedding feast, so he gave it as a gift to somebody else so that his father could attend, and that man that he had gifted the feast to just decided to consecrate the whole thing to the temple, which the son was not okay with, and it was ruled that it wasn't a valid gift anyways. The Gemara further qualifies these points. There are related incidents brought and discussed, and further in regards to the validity of the wedding gift consecration case and similar, and that's the end of Chapter 5. Chapter 6 of Tractate Nedarim discusses further laws of vows, further on specific terminology that can be used in a vow. The first Mishnah says, someone who takes a vow against partaking in that which is cooked, he's still allowed to eat or benefit from roasted or undercooked food. If somebody vows against tasting a cooked food, he can't eat liquidy food from a pot, but he can eat solid foods and also a specific type of egg or gourd, which will be described. If somebody vows against a preparation of a pot, he can't eat food that's been boiled extensively. If somebody vows against tasting any food that goes into a pot, he can't eat any foods that are cooked in a pot. The Gemara says, some say if somebody vows against cooked foods, that actually does include roasted food, which was based on the unique wording of their locale. And also, secondarily, from a verse, which seems to imply that roasted foods are referred to as cooked. In regards to the vow against tasting cooked foods, where it said that it forbids liquidy foods, that's because the specific use of terminology refers to foods which are eaten with bread, and sources are provided. It also discusses which types or parts of a squash are good for a sick person. It also says the Mishnah goes against the practice of the Babylonians, who eat thick porridge with bread, as that's excluded. It discusses additional points on the proper manner of eating porridge. It also mentions one sage whose face shone, and it's attributed either to his great wisdom or to his personal healthy practices. It also discusses the beginnings of the great sage Rabbi Akiva, who started as an illiterate shepherd, and his employer's daughter, Rachel, saw that he was a good man with great potential, and offered to marry him so long as he would study Torah. Rachel's father was very upset by this, and disowned her, but they married anyways, and they were extremely poor. It says they would sleep in a straw shed, and Akiva would pick straw out of his wife's hair, and say if he had the means he would give her a golden tiara instead. Eliyahu the prophet appeared as a poor man begging for a little straw, and Akiva told his wife, see, at least we even have straw. Anyways, Akiva eventually went to study at the academy and did so for 12 years. He then returned and overheard a wicked man criticizing his wife, saying, firstly, your station was far higher than your husband, and secondly, he's abandoned you for the past 12 years. Rachel responded to the man, if Akiva was here, she would tell him to go and study for an additional 12 years. So Rabbi Akiva turned and went back to study for another 12 years, and then returned as a great sage with 24,000 pairs of students. Everybody in the town went out to greet him, including his wife, who still wore her poor clothes, so Rabbi Akiva's students, who didn't know who she was, pushed her away, but Rabbi Akiva said to stop, as his Torah and all of theirs belonged to her. Anyways, Rachel's father, who had disowned her a while earlier, heard a great sage had come to town, and came to him to release himself from the vow he had made against providing for his daughter. Rabbi Akiva revealed who he was, and received great wealth from his father-in-law. It also says Rabbi Akiva became very wealthy, as the figurehead of a ship broke off, and was found by Rabbi Akiva, and also that he received a treasure chest as he gave a few coins to some sailors to give him anything, and they had found a chest which happened to have been filled with gold coins from a sunken trader ship. He also received a lot of wealth from a Roman noblewoman, from the wife of the Roman governor Turnus Rufus, who would eventually execute Rabbi Akiva, and also from a man named Kitia Bar Shalom, another Roman nobleman who was kind to the Jewish people. A different sage also gave some sailors some coins in exchange for anything, so they gave him a monkey, which ran away into a hole, leading him to find a cache of pearls. It also says a story that the daughter of one of the Caesars was chatting with the sage Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah, and she said that he had such beautiful Torah knowledge, but he was extremely physically unattractive. So he responded by asking where her father kept their best wines, and she said in earthenware vessels. So the sage said they should be kept in fancy gold and silver vessels instead. So she did that, swapping them all into gold and silver vessels, and all the wine went bad. So the sage explained it's the same way with learning Torah. She asked, but there are also extremely handsome Torah scholars, and he said they'd be even more learned if they weren't. It also speaks of a time that there was a different woman who insulted the teacher of a sage during a court case, so the sage excommunicated her and she died. It also describes the special mentioned egg, which was a specially prepared egg that was used for medical diagnostics. There are other further points spoken on. It also describes the preparation of the special gourd dish mentioned. New Mishnah, if somebody vowed against the preserved food, he can only not eat preserved vegetables. If he vowed against tasting preserved food, he can't eat any preserved food. The Gemara says it's unresolved what he's banned from if he vows against that which is preserved, that which is undercooked, that which is roasted, etc. A new Mishnah, if somebody vows against the roast, he can't eat roast meat. If he vowed against tasting roast, he can't eat any roast food. If somebody vows against the salted food, he can't eat salted fish. If somebody vowed against tasting salted food, he can't eat any salted food. If somebody vows against eating fish or fishes, he can't eat any fish, be they large or small, salted or unsalted, or raw or cooked, but he can eat a specific type of chopped fish and brine. If somebody vows against eating a specific type of mixture of small salted fish, he can't eat chopped fish, but he can eat brine. If somebody vows against eating chopped fish, he can still eat brine. The Gemara describes which words refer to which types of fish. New Mishnah, if somebody vows against milk, it's debated if they can have whey. If somebody vows against whey, he can have milk. If somebody vows against cheese, he cannot eat any type of cheese, salted or unsalted. If somebody vows against eating meat, it's debated if he can eat gravy or meat shreds. There was a ruling which implies not, but the case was possibly by a specific vow against a specific piece of meat, wherein he couldn't eat the meat or anything its flavor mixed with. If somebody vows against having wine, he can eat a cooked dish that tastes of wine. If somebody vows against tasting wine, he can't eat a dish with wine where the wine can be tasted. The Gemara explains the dispute if you can eat whey, if somebody vowed against milk, is that in some locations they refer to whey as whey of milk. New Mishnah, somebody who vows against grapes can have wine. Somebody who vows against olives can have oil. Somebody who vows against tasting grapes or olives cannot have wine or oil. The Gemara further debates these points. New Mishnah, somebody who vowed against dates can have date honey. Somebody who vowed against winter grapes can have winter grape vinegar. There's a debate on if generally somebody vows against a food, if a derivative of that food is still permissible, if it shares the same name as the food. The Gemara explains that it needs to clarify date honey and vinegar to say what we hold by edible foods, where their derivative is edible and where it's not edible. New Mishnah, somebody who vows against wine can have apple wine. Somebody who vows against oil can have sesame oil. Somebody who vows against honey can have date honey. Somebody who vows against vinegar can have vinegar of winter grapes. Somebody who vows against leeks can have a leek with a head. Somebody who vows against greens can have wild greens. This is all because it goes in accordance with the specific used terms. The Gemara says, the point on oil applies in Israel. In Babylon, if somebody vows against oil, they also can't have sesame oil, but they can have olive oil. If both oils are used, he can't eat either as a stringency. By eating greens, it's similarly reversed that you can only eat the wild greens during a sabbatical year when farming is forbidden. This applies only if greens are not brought from out of Israel inside. Some don't allow doing that at all, out of concern that dirt will be stuck on the produce and violate some laws of impurity. New Mishnah, if somebody vowed against eating cabbage, he can't eat asparagus, a specific type of cabbage, and vice versa. If somebody vows against grits, it's debated if he can have pottage. If somebody vows against pottage, he can't have grits. If somebody vows against pottage, there's debate if he can have garlic. If someone vows against garlic, he can have pottage. If somebody vows against lentils, it's debated if he can have honey-fried lentils. If somebody vowed against having honey-fried lentils, he can have regular lentils. If somebody vowed against tasting wheat grain or grains, he can't have them in flour or bread. If somebody vowed against tasting grit or grits, he can't eat them raw or cooked. Some say if somebody vowed against tasting grit or wheat grain, he can still chew them raw. The Gemara further qualifies these rulings, and that's the end of chapter 6.